Judge Marcus Wright stared at the officers who had handcuffed him yesterday, their faces draining of color as they recognized him on the bench. The same badge that had bruised his wrists now gleamed under courtroom lights. Their careers were now in his hands. Before we dive into this powerful story of justice and racial reckoning, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe in karma, and subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. Now, let's rewind to see how these officers dug their own graves. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Interstate 40 as Judge Marcus Wright guided his Mercedes along the highway. His 53 years weighed heavily on him today, not just from the physical exhaustion of driving 6 hours straight, but from the emotional burden of his destination. His mother's funeral was tomorrow in Atlanta, and the weight of grief pressed against his chest with each mile marker. The Pinewood County rest stop appeared just as his eyelids began to droop dangerously. Marcus pulled in, parking his midnight blue sedan with out-of-state plates in a spot away from other vehicles. He stepped out, stretching his 6'2" frame, his casual attire of jeans and a Howard University sweatshirt, a far cry from his usual tailored suits and judicial robes. The rest area was quiet, just a few travelers milling about as Marcus walked toward the facilities. He didn't notice the patrol car that pulled in shortly after him, nor the two officers inside watching his movements with unwarranted suspicion. Officers Ryan Daniels and Brett Conway had patrolled this stretch of highway for 4 and 7 years respectively, and both had developed reputations in the department. Not for exemplary service, but for their disturbing pattern of stopping minorities for dubious reasons. "Check out that Benz," Conway said, nodding toward Marcus's car. "Georgia plates, but with a northern frame. Bet you $10 he's running something." Daniels snorted in agreement, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Nobody looking like that affords that ride honestly." Both officers approached as Marcus returned to his vehicle. He felt their presence before he saw them, that sixth sense many black men develop through necessity. "Afternoon, sir," Conway said, his tone carrying an edge that immediately put Marcus on alert. "That your vehicle?" Marcus stood straight, adopting the calm demeanor that had served him well through 20 years on the federal bench. "Yes, officer, it is. Is there a problem?" Daniels circled the car, peering through windows. "You passing through or got business around here?" The question came loaded with implication. Marcus kept his hands visible, decades of learned survival tactics kicking in automatically. "I'm on my way to Atlanta for a family matter." "License and registration," Conway demanded without preamble, hand resting on his holster. Marcus spoke clearly. "My registration is in the glove compartment and my wallet is in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for it now if that's all right." Conway's posture stiffened. "Just move slow." Marcus carefully retrieved his wallet, extracting his driver's license and judicial identification card. "I'm Federal Judge Marcus Wright from the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. I'm traveling for my mother's funeral." Conway glanced at the ID, then laughed. "Judge, huh? And I'm the Attorney General. Let's try again, buddy. Where'd you get this car?" Bewilderment crossed Marcus's face. "Officer, I've identified myself correctly. You can verify my credentials." Daniels stepped closer. "Know how many fake IDs we see out here? People claiming to be all sorts of important." Marcus maintained his composure, though his pulse quickened. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I am indeed a federal judge. Please call it in if you need verification." Conway's radio crackled with a transmission about a shoplifting incident miles away, but he ignored it, focused on Marcus. "Going to need you to step away from the vehicle, sir." Marcus complied, keeping his movements measured. "May I ask why I've committed no violation?" Conway's hand moved to his handcuffs. "Because I said so. You're acting suspicious, and that fancy story about being a judge isn't checking out." When Marcus reached slowly toward his phone, Conway drew his weapon. "Hands where I can see them." Marcus froze, adrenaline flooding his system. "I was only reaching for my phone to call my clerk, who can verify my identity." What happened next occurred with frightening speed. Conway holstered his weapon and grabbed Marcus's arm, twisting it behind his back while Daniels moved in to assist. "You're resisting," Conway growled, though Marcus had offered no resistance. The handcuffs bit into his wrists as they secured them too tightly. A small crowd of travelers had gathered, watching wide-eyed as a distinguished-looking black man in his 50s was manhandled by two white officers. "I'm not resisting," Marcus stated firmly, loud enough for onlookers to hear. "This is unlawful detention." Conway pushed Marcus against the car. "Search the vehicle," he instructed Daniels. "Sir, I do not consent to a search," Marcus stated clearly. "Probable cause," Daniels replied with a smirk, already opening the driver's door. From the trunk, Daniels pulled out Marcus's garment bag, unzipping it to reveal judicial robes. "Look at this," he called to Conway. "Got himself a costume and everything, real elaborate setup." In the glove compartment they found court documents bearing Marcus's name. Still, the officers remained skeptical, or perhaps were too committed to their mistake to back down. "Disorderly conduct and resisting arrest," Conway announced, reading Marcus his rights as he was guided to the patrol car. During the drive to the station, the officers seemingly forgot about their body cams recording every word. "These guys always got some story," Daniels remarked. "Judge Dr. Professor never just admits to the truth." Conway laughed. "Yeah, and always playing the race card when they get caught. Like the color of their skin is why they're in trouble, not the stolen car." Marcus sat silently in the back, his judicial temperament holding despite the humiliation and anger coursing through him. He had faced racism before, but never so blatant, never so dangerous. As the patrol car pulled into the Pinewood County Sheriff's Station, Marcus mentally cataloged every violation of his rights, every racist comment, every procedural failure. If he was going to be subjected to this injustice, he would ensure it wasn't without consequence. Little did Officers Daniels and Conway know that their routine harassment of a black traveler had just set in motion events that would shake their department to its foundation. The fluorescent lights of the Pinewood County Sheriff's Station buzzed overhead as Officers Daniels and Conway led Marcus through the doors, his wrists still bound painfully behind his back. The station smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee, its beige walls adorned with faded photographs of officers past and present. At the front desk, Sergeant Richard Tanner barely looked up from his computer. "Got another one, huh?" he remarked casually, as if Marcus were simply the day's catch rather than a human being. "Says he's some big-shot federal judge," Conway snickered, pushing Marcus forward. "Found him acting suspicious at the rest stop." Tanner finally looked up, his eyes narrowing, as he assessed Marcus with the same contempt shown by the arresting officers. "Name," he demanded. "Judge Marcus Wright, Eastern District of Pennsylvania," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his circumstances. "And I'd like to make my phone call immediately." Tanner laughed, exchanging glances with Conway. "Judge, huh? Well, Your Honor, we'll get to your phone call when we're good and ready." The booking process proceeded with deliberate slowness, a subtle form of punishment. Marcus's fingerprints were taken, personal items cataloged and placed in a plastic bin. His judicial ID and bar card were set aside with obvious skepticism. After nearly an hour of processing, Marcus was led to a holding cell where 3 other men waited. 2 were white, 1 Hispanic, and all looked up as the cell door clanged shut behind the newest arrival. Marcus took a seat on the bench, wincing as his body reminded him of the rough handling he'd received. The youngest occupant, a black man perhaps in his late 20s, nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "What they get you for?" he asked quietly once the officer had walked away. "Apparently driving while black," Marcus responded, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had left angry red marks. "Same officers who brought you in got me 2 days ago. I'm Calvin Jefferson." They spoke in hushed tones, Calvin revealing a pattern that confirmed Marcus's suspicions. Officers Daniels and Conway had a reputation in the area's black community for harassment, trumped-up charges, and finding evidence when necessary. Calvin himself had been arrested for matching the description of a suspect in a convenience store robbery, despite the actual suspect being described as 6 inches shorter and 15 years younger. As they exchanged stories, the door to the holding area opened and an older black officer entered. Sergeant James Miller stopped short when his eyes landed on Marcus, recognition dawning immediately. "Judge Wright," he asked, disbelief evident in his voice. Miller had attended a judicial conference in Philadelphia the previous year, where Marcus had been a featured speaker on criminal justice reform. "Sergeant Miller," Marcus acknowledged with a small nod. The officer's face drained of color as he realized the magnitude of the situation. Without another word, Miller turned and rushed from the holding area. 20 minutes later, Police Chief Robert Roberts burst into the area, his face a mask of professional concern, hiding obvious panic. Behind him, Miller looked genuinely distressed. "Judge Wright, there's been a terrible misunderstanding," Roberts began, signaling for the cell to be opened immediately. "We had no idea of your identity, sir." Marcus stood slowly. "My identity was made clear to your officers repeatedly, Chief Roberts. They chose not to verify it, instead making assumptions based solely on my appearance." Roberts flinched at the calm precision of Marcus's words. "I'll need to review the incident, of course, but I assure you we'll get this straightened out immediately." While Roberts spoke, Marcus noticed Miller reviewing body cam footage on a tablet, his expression growing increasingly alarmed. "Chief," Miller interrupted, "you need to see this now." Whatever Roberts saw on the screen caused him to pale visibly. "Judge Wright, please accept my sincere apologies. You're free to go, of course. We can arrange transportation to wherever you need." "I'd like to make my phone call first," Marcus insisted. In the privacy of an interview room, Marcus called Chief Judge Beverly Thompson, his colleague and friend from the judicial circuit. Her outrage was immediate and volcanic. "They did what, Marcus? This is beyond unacceptable. I'm calling the governor's office directly." Marcus calmed her enough to explain his intentions. "Beverly, I need you to do something else for me. Check tomorrow's docket. There should be a misconduct hearing for these same officers on an unrelated matter. I want that case." A long pause followed before Thompson replied, "Marcus, are you sure that's wise? The appearance of conflict is exactly what I'm counting on," Marcus finished. "These officers need to understand the consequences of their actions, and not just with me. What they've done to others like Calvin Jefferson demands accountability." By the time Marcus was formally released, it was well past midnight. Chief Roberts personally returned his belongings, offering a transparently insincere apology filled with phrases like, "unfortunate incident," and "not representative of our department." As Marcus prepared to leave, he paused by the holding cell where Calvin remained. "I'll be back for you," he promised quietly. Outside, Roberts attempted one final damage control effort. "Judge Wright, I hope we can resolve this matter discreetly. Our department has an excellent relationship with the judiciary and—" Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. "Chief Roberts, this matter will be resolved through proper channels, I assure you. Good night." As Marcus drove away, he glimpsed Daniels and Conway in the station parking lot laughing together as they ended their shift. They appeared utterly unconcerned, confident in the system that had always protected them. Marcus checked into a hotel at 3 a.m, his body exhausted but his mind racing. As he lay in the unfamiliar bed, memories from his life flickered through his consciousness like an old film reel. Being pulled over with his father at 12 years old, watching the proud man reduced to "sir" and "please" while white officers searched their car without cause. His law school professor suggesting he might be more comfortable at a historically black university. The client who refused his representation, demanding a real lawyer. The security guard who followed him through high-end stores even after he became a judge. Each memory a reminder that no achievement, no position, no title could fully shield him from the reality of being black in America. As dawn broke, Marcus showered and dressed in his spare suit, the one he'd planned to wear to his mother's funeral. Instead, he would wear it to court. His mother, who had marched with Dr. King, who had registered voters despite threats, who had raised him to believe justice was possible, even when evidence suggested otherwise, would have understood. In fact, as Marcus knotted his tie with practiced precision, he could almost hear her voice, "Make it count, son, make it count." The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Pinewood County Courthouse, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air of the nearly empty hallways. Officers Ryan Daniels and Brett Conway strolled in with the easy confidence of men who had never faced consequences for their actions. Their routine misconduct hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock, a bureaucratic formality they had navigated successfully numerous times before. "My cousin's got a new boat," Conway was saying as they passed through the security checkpoint, nodding familiarly to the guards. "Thinking about heading out to the lake this weekend if this wraps up quick enough." Daniels chuckled. "Won't take long. These hearings never do." They made their way to Courtroom C, where such administrative matters were typically handled, only to find a note on the door redirecting them to the main courtroom. "That's weird," Daniels remarked, frowning slightly. "Says it's been reassigned to a special judicial panel." Conway shrugged. "Probably some efficiency thing, or the regular hearing officer is out sick." Neither officer appeared concerned as they changed direction toward the courthouse's primary courtroom, the grand space typically reserved for high-profile trials. Meanwhile, Conway's father retired. Police Captain Gerald Conway was already working the phones from his lakeside home. "Jim, it's Gerald. My boy's got another one of those nuisance hearings today. Anything you can do to grease the wheels?" As the elder Conway made calls to his network of judges, court administrators, and political connections, Judge Marcus Wright was preparing in the judicial chambers behind the main courtroom. He reviewed the body cam footage for the third time, watching with judicial detachment the very events he had experienced firsthand just hours before. Each viewing revealed new details. Conway muting his microphone during certain exchanges, Daniels finding a small bag of what appeared to be marijuana in Marcus's car during the search, only to pocket it when it became clear they were dealing with a judge. Most damning were the casual racial comments exchanged during the drive to the station, clear evidence of a pattern of behavior rather than an isolated incident. A knock at the chamber door interrupted his viewing. Chief Judge Beverly Thompson entered, her expression a mixture of concern and support. "Marcus, I've reviewed everything. This is worse than I imagined. The constitutional violations alone." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I've spoken with the Judicial Ethics Committee. Given your direct involvement, they've suggested you should recuse yourself from this case." Marcus set down the tablet, meeting his colleague's gaze directly. "And what do you think, Beverly?" Thompson sighed. "Legally, there's no absolute requirement for recusal. The Judicial Code gives you discretion here. But Marcus, these officers arrested you less than 24 hours ago. No one would fault you for stepping aside." Marcus stood adjusting his robes. "These officers have had 17 complaints filed against them in the past 3 years, 15 involving Black or Hispanic citizens. 0 consequences." He moved to the window overlooking the courthouse square. "Yesterday, they didn't see Judge Marcus Wright. They saw a black man they could harass with impunity. I won't recuse myself because this isn't about me. It's about every Marcus Wright who doesn't have a gavel to protect them afterward." As Thompson left court, Clerk Sarah Jenkins entered with additional files. "Judge, I pulled the records you requested. Officers Daniels and Conway have appeared before the Misconduct Board 7 times collectively. All complaints were dismissed or resulted in minimal disciplinary action." She hesitated before adding, "There's something else. Several complaints mysteriously disappeared from the system, but I found paper backups in storage." Marcus reviewed the documents, a disturbing pattern emerging before his eyes. Before he could respond, District Attorney William Hamilton requested entry. The DA was a tall, silver-haired man with political ambitions and a carefully cultivated public image of fairness. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "Judge Wright, what a surprise to see you presiding today. I wasn't aware you were visiting our jurisdiction." His tone was pleasant but probing. "A last-minute arrangement," Marcus replied evenly. Judge Thompson thought an outside perspective might be valuable on this case. Hamilton settled into a chair without invitation. "Well, we certainly appreciate your assistance, though I wonder if perhaps one of our local judges might be more familiar with department protocols. These administrative hearings can be quite routine." The implication was clear beneath the courteous veneer. Hamilton was offering Marcus a graceful exit. "I find that fresh eyes often see details others might miss, Mr. Hamilton. But thank you for your concern." Hamilton's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Just trying to be helpful. These officers have served our community for years. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings to unduly impact their careers." As the DA left, Marcus returned to the body cam footage, this time with renewed focus. What was it that Hamilton feared he might see? The answer came within minutes. During the footage of his own arrest, in a moment when both officers thought their cameras were off, Conway made a telling comment. "Hamilton will fix it like always, just like that Jackson case last year." Marcus immediately requested the file on the referenced case, revealing that a young black man named Deshaun Jackson had filed a brutality complaint that was mysteriously withdrawn after he received a surprisingly harsh sentence for a minor drug offense. While Marcus connected these disturbing dots, Calvin's girlfriend, Aisha Martin, had arrived at the courthouse with a USB drive. She managed to get it to Sarah Jenkins with a simple message, "Judge Wright needs to see this." The drive contained cell phone videos from multiple incidents involving Daniels and Conway, recorded by community members too frightened to come forward officially. Just as Marcus was reviewing this new evidence, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Back off if you know what's good for you. Judges aren't untouchable." Do you believe police officers should be held accountable when they abuse their power? Comment number 1, if you think officers like Daniels and Conway deserve to face real consequences for their actions. Or number 2, if you think the judge should recuse himself from this case. Like this video if you've ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice being served. What would you do if you were in Judge Wright's position? Would you use your power to teach these officers a lesson, or would you take the safer path and step aside? Let's continue to see how this explosive courtroom confrontation unfolds. The main courtroom of the Pinewood County Courthouse stood in stark contrast to the functional blandness of the smaller hearing rooms. Ornate wooden paneling lined the walls, rising to meet a coffered ceiling from which hung chandeliers that had illuminated proceedings since the 1930s. The gallery benches, polished by decades of use, filled quickly as word spread about the unusual reassignment of a routine police misconduct hearing to the grand courtroom. By 9:45, an eclectic mix of spectators had gathered. Court employees drawn by curiosity sat alongside local reporters alerted by anonymous tips. A contingent of uniformed officers clustered near the front, their presence an unsubtle show of solidarity with their colleagues. On the opposite side, civil rights activists from the community occupied several rows, their expressions somber and expectant. At precisely 10 o'clock, the bailiff called the room to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marcus Wright presiding." The side door opened and Marcus emerged in his judicial robes, his bearing dignified as he took his place at the bench. From his elevated position he could see Officers Daniels and Conway at the respondents' table, their previously relaxed demeanors frozen in shock as they recognized him. Conway's face drained of color, while Daniels blinked rapidly as if hoping the vision before him might change. Their attorney, Gregory Whitman, leaned in as they urgently whispered to him, his own expression shifting from confusion to alarm. Marcus spoke with measured authority. "Please be seated. This hearing will now come to order in the matter of civilian complaints against Officers Ryan Daniels and Brett Conway of the Pinewood County Sheriff's Department." He continued with the formal opening of proceedings, his voice betraying no hint of the previous day's encounter. Before Marcus could proceed to the charges, Whitman shot to his feet. "Your Honor, before we continue, I must request an immediate sidebar." Marcus regarded him calmly. "Mr. Whitman, this is an administrative hearing, not a trial. State your concern for the record." Whitman straightened his tie nervously. Your Honor, it has just come to my attention that you may have had previous contact with my clients that constitutes a clear conflict of interest. I must respectfully request your immediate recusal from these proceedings. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as spectators sensed unexpected drama unfolding. Marcus folded his hands before him. Counselor, are you suggesting that I cannot fairly evaluate the evidence in this case? Whitman glanced at his clients, who stared back with pleading eyes. With all due respect, Your Honor, it would be impossible for any judge to remain impartial after being personally involved in an incident with the officers in question. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate your concern for judicial propriety, Mr. Whitman. The court is well acquainted with the standards for recusal under judicial ethics guidelines. He removed his reading glasses, addressing not just Whitman, but the entire courtroom. The relevant standard is not whether a judge has had contact with the parties, but whether that contact makes fair judgment impossible. In Mayberry v. Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court established that even being the target of contemptuous conduct does not automatically disqualify a judge if they can maintain objectivity. The gallery fell silent as the implications became clear to everyone present. Marcus was acknowledging his encounter with the officers while simultaneously establishing his legal right to preside. In Johnson v. Mississippi, Marcus continued, the court further clarified that only when personal animus is demonstrated should a judge step aside. I harbor no such feelings toward Officers Daniels and Conway. I view yesterday's incident as informative rather than disqualifying. Whitman's face reddened. Yesterday's incident? Your Honor, are you saying these officers arrested you yesterday and you're still presiding over their case today? This is unprecedented. Marcus fixed him with a steady gaze. What's unprecedented, Counselor, is the pattern of behavior these officers have demonstrated toward citizens of color in this county. Now, shall we proceed to the actual complaints before this court? Or would you like to file a formal motion for recusal with specific legal grounds? Defeated for the moment, Whitman returned to his seat. The prosecutor assistant district attorney, Michaela Jackson, rose next. Unlike Hamilton, the young black woman showed no signs of attempting to derail the proceedings. Your Honor, the prosecution is prepared to present evidence of 3 separate incidents involving Officers Daniels and Conway demonstrating a pattern of misconduct, including excessive force, unlawful search and seizure, and falsification of reports. She glanced briefly at Marcus. In light of recent developments, we would also request permission to supplement our evidence with newly available body cam footage. Marcus nodded. So ordered. Call your first witness. What followed was a clinical deconstruction of the officer's professional conduct. 3 citizens, 2 black and 1 Hispanic, testified about encounters remarkably similar to Marcus's own experience. Each described being stopped without clear cause, subjected to aggressive questioning, and having their vehicles searched under dubious claims of probable cause. Throughout the testimony, Daniels and Conway shifted uncomfortably in their seats, occasionally leaning in to whisper urgently to their attorney. When the body cam footage from Marcus's own arrest began playing on the courtroom monitors, audible gasps erupted from the gallery. The video showed in stark detail the officer's contemptuous treatment, their refusal to verify his identity, and most damningly, their racist comments during the drive to the station. Whitman objected repeatedly. Your Honor, this footage was not part of the original complaint. It's being introduced solely because of your personal involvement. Marcus overruled him each time. The footage is relevant to establishing a pattern of conduct which is central to these proceedings. As the day progressed, Marcus faced his most significant ethical dilemma. While he had acknowledged his contact with the officers, he had not explicitly identified himself as the man in the video. To do so would potentially center the proceedings on his experience rather than on the pattern affecting the community. Yet, failing to disclose it fully felt disingenuous. During a brief recess, Judge Thompson visited his chambers again. They know it's you in that video, Marcus. everyone does. But legally, you've handled it perfectly. You've acknowledged the contact without making yourself the victim in these proceedings." Marcus sighed. "The law may be satisfied, Beverly, but is justice? These officers didn't just mistreat a judge. They've been terrorizing citizens without consequences for years." Thompson's expression softened. "And that's exactly why you shouldn't recuse yourself. This isn't about your dignity. It's about everyone who doesn't have your position to protect them afterward." The afternoon session had barely begun when an unexpected disruption occurred. Gerald Conway, Officer Conway's father, burst through the courtroom doors. "This is a disgrace," the retired captain shouted. "My son deserves a fair hearing, not a kangaroo court." As bailiffs moved to remove him, the elder Conway pointed accusingly at Marcus. "You're using your position to get revenge. This isn't justice." Marcus remained impassive as Gerald Conway was escorted out, his shouted protests fading down the hallway. "The outburst will be stricken from the record," Marcus stated calmly. "This court will not be influenced by attempts at intimidation." The day concluded with the introduction of the officers' personnel records revealing the pattern Sarah had discovered earlier. 17 complaints, 15 involving minorities, 0 significant consequences. As Whitman requested dismissal of all charges for the final time, Marcus denied the motion and adjourned until morning. "This court will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow," he announced. "The respondents are ordered to be present." As the courtroom cleared, Marcus remained at the bench reviewing his notes. He felt the weight of every eye upon him, the quiet murmurs of spectators, the pointed glares from the police contingent. He had upheld the letter and spirit of the law today, maintaining judicial detachment despite the personal nature of the evidence. But as he gathered his papers, a question lingered in his mind. In a system designed to protect those with power, could true justice ever be more than an aspiration? The digital clock on the hotel nightstand read 2:17 a.m. when Marcus's phone vibrated against the wooden surface. Reaching for it in the darkness, he squinted at the screen. Unknown number. The message contained no words, just an image of a judicial robe slashed to ribbons. A second message followed, "Judges die too." Marcus sat up, fully sleep evaporating instantly. He switched on the lamp, suddenly aware of every small noise in the unfamiliar room. Thoughts of calling hotel security crossed his mind, but what would he tell them? That someone was threatening him via text that wouldn't stop a determined attacker. Besides, involving security might alert the media, and Marcus wanted the focus to remain on the case, not on threats against him personally. Instead, he forwarded the messages to Judge Thompson and saved screenshots as evidence. Sleep remained elusive for the rest of the night. As dawn broke over Pinewood County, local television stations had already interrupted their regular programming with breaking news. In an unprecedented development, sources confirmed that federal Judge Marcus Wright, who was mysteriously assigned to preside over a police misconduct hearing, was himself arrested by the very officers facing disciplinary action just one day before the hearing began. Camera crews stationed themselves outside the courthouse entrances while social media erupted with heated debates. The hashtag #JudgeJurisdiction was trending alongside #BlackRobesMatter. By 8:30, 2 distinct groups of demonstrators had formed on opposite sides of the courthouse square. Police union supporters carried signs reading, "Support our officers," and "Blue Lives Matter," while civil rights activists responded with, "No one above the law," and "Justice is colorblind, but our system isn't." Marcus watched the coverage briefly before muting the television in his hotel room. Instead of driving directly to the courthouse, he made a detour. The Oak Hill Cemetery lay peaceful in the morning light, dew still glistening on the grass between markers. Marcus found his mother's plot easily, though the earth had not yet been disturbed for her coming interment. He stood silently before the temporary marker hands in his pockets. "I miss your guidance, Mom," he whispered after several minutes. "You always knew where the line was between justice and vengeance." Eleanor Wright had been his moral compass throughout his career, from his days as a public defender to his appointment to the federal bench. She had marched for voting rights in the 60s, taught in underfunded schools for 40 years, and raised her son to believe that dignity came from within, not from titles or positions. "They're saying I should step aside," Marcus continued softly, "that I'm too close to the case. But you always taught me that distance from injustice is a luxury we can't afford." As he turned to leave, an elderly groundskeeper nodded respectfully. "You must be Eleanor's boy," the man said. "She spoke of you often, said you were changing the system from the inside." Marcus smiled sadly. "Trying to, sir. Some days it feels impossible." The groundskeeper leaned on his rake. "She believed in you. Said sometimes the system needs someone who's seen both sides of the bench." The simple wisdom followed Marcus as he drove toward the courthouse. Upon arrival, he was immediately approached by Sarah Jenkins, the court clerk. "Judge Wright," she whispered urgently. "Calvin Jefferson was released at dawn. No explanation, no paperwork. He's gone." Marcus frowned. "Gone where?" Sarah shook her head. "No one knows. His girlfriend Aisha has been trying to reach him, but his phone is off. She's worried." Before Marcus could respond, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. His car parked in the reserved judicial space had been vandalized overnight. The paint was scratched with crude racial epithets, and the word recuse had been carved into the hood. Court security documented the damage while Marcus proceeded inside, his expression betraying nothing of his inner turmoil. In his chambers, Judge Thompson was waiting with news of her own. "The State Judicial Commission called an emergency meeting this morning. Senator Blackburn is demanding your removal from the case." Marcus hung up his overcoat. "On what grounds?" "The usual political doublespeak, appearance of impropriety, unusual procedural circumstances, nothing with legal merit, but they're applying pressure everywhere they can." Marcus prepared his robes methodically, the familiar routine a small comfort amid the chaos. "And your position, Beverly?" She met his gaze steadily. "I told them to submit their concerns in writing and cited every relevant precedent supporting your right to preside. But Marcus," she hesitated, "they're not just coming after you professionally. Someone broke into your hotel room while you were out." Marcus froze. "What?" "Security discovered it during a routine patrol. Your room was searched and your case files were rifled through. Nothing appears to be missing, but—" Marcus immediately thought of the USB drive from Aisha containing community evidence against the officers. He kept it in his briefcase, which had remained with him. "I've arranged different accommodations for tonight," Thompson continued. "A place no one would think to look." The implication was clear. This had escalated beyond professional intimidation. As they spoke, Marcus's mind drifted back to his childhood in Philadelphia. He was 10 years old, walking home from school, when police officers stopped him and his friends, forcing them against a wall to be searched. Matching the description they'd said of the black children, though the suspect they sought was reportedly an adult. His father had tried to file a complaint afterward, only to be threatened with a loitering charge for his efforts. 30 years later, and the tactics remained the same. Only the veneer of professionalism had changed. A knock at the chamber door interrupted his memories. Thompson answered it, revealing a court security officer. "Judge Wright, there's a call for you on the secure line. Supreme Court Justice Wilson." Marcus accepted the call with surprise. Justice Edward Wilson had been his mentor during law school and had supported his nomination to the federal bench. "Marcus, I've been hearing concerning reports from Georgia," the justice began without preamble. "Are you safe?" Their conversation was brief but meaningful. The justice offered both personal support and professional advice, concluding with, "The eyes of the judicial community are on this case, Marcus. Whatever you decide, make it legally unassailable." As Marcus prepared to enter the courtroom for the day's proceedings, Sarah rushed in with Aisha Martin in tow. The young woman clutched her phone, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "Judge Wright, I just received this." She displayed a series of messages from different community members, each documenting instances where Officers Daniels and Conway had harassed, detained, or arrested people of color under questionable circumstances. One video showed Conway planting evidence in a car while Daniels distracted the driver. "People are too scared to come forward officially," Aisha explained, "but after hearing about you standing up to them, they want to help." Marcus studied the evidence carefully. "Ms. Martin, are these individuals willing to testify?" Aisha's expression fell. "Most are afraid of retaliation, but they wanted you to know the truth even if they can't say it publicly." As courtroom proceedings were about to begin, Marcus faced his most difficult decision yet. The mounting threats against him personally had to be weighed against the importance of seeing this case through. Recusing himself would ensure his safety and professional standing. Continuing meant potential danger and certain controversy. As the bailiff waited expectantly at the door, Marcus thought again of his mother's words from years ago. Doing the right thing rarely means doing the easy thing. With renewed resolve, he nodded to the bailiff. "Let's proceed." The second day of the hearing began under heightened security. Court officers positioned themselves strategically throughout the courtroom, while additional deputies patrolled the courthouse perimeter. The gallery had swelled beyond capacity, forcing many spectators to wait in the hallway for any news of the proceedings. Marcus took the bench precisely at 9, his demeanor betraying none of the pressure he faced. "This hearing will come to order," he announced, his voice steady and authoritative. As expected, defense attorney Whitman immediately rose. "Your Honor, before we continue, I must renew my motion for dismissal of all charges against my clients, or alternatively for your recusal from these proceedings." Marcus regarded him with practiced judicial patience. "On what new grounds, Counselor?" Whitman straightened imperceptibly. "Your Honor, evidence has emerged that you were not merely in contact with my clients as previously acknowledged, but were in fact the subject of an arrest by these officers. This creates an insurmountable conflict of interest that no reasonable person could overcome." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate your concern for judicial propriety, Mr. Whitman. However, your motion is denied." He removed his reading glasses, addressing the packed courtroom directly. The judicial code requires recusal when a judge cannot be impartial, not when maintaining impartiality might be challenging. Every judge brings life experiences to the bench. Some have been crime victims, others have faced discrimination. These experiences inform our understanding of justice rather than disqualifying us from seeking it. Murmurs rippled through the gallery as Marcus continued. "Furthermore, if we established that any officer could disqualify a judge simply by arresting them prior to a hearing, we would create a dangerous precedent that undermines judicial independence. The motion is denied. Proceed with your defense." Whitman, visibly frustrated, returned to his seat beside the officers, who shifted uncomfortably as the prosecution called its next witness. "The state calls Sergeant James Miller," announced Assistant DA Michaela Jackson. A collective intake of breath swept through the police contingent as the veteran black officer made his way to the witness stand. Miller, a 24-year department veteran nearing retirement, had never before testified against fellow officers. After being sworn in, Miller straightened his uniform and faced the courtroom. "Sergeant Miller, Jackson began. "How long have you worked with Officers Daniels and Conway?" 7 years with Officer Conway, 4 with Officer Daniels," Miller replied, his deep voice resonating in the hushed room. "And during that time, have you observed any patterns in their policing methods, particularly regarding minority citizens?" Miller hesitated, glancing briefly toward his colleagues before answering. "Yes. Both officers have demonstrated concerning behaviors when interacting with Black and Hispanic individuals." For the next 30 minutes, Miller methodically detailed what he described as a culture of targeted harassment within certain units of the department. He described witnessing Officers Daniels and Conway conducting pretextual stops of minority drivers, using excessive force during arrests of Black suspects, and employing racial slurs when no supervisors were present. "Why haven't you reported these incidents before today?" Jackson asked. Miller's expression hardened. "I did report them. Multiple times. The complaints were either ignored or mysteriously disappeared from the system. Defense attorney Whitman's cross-examination was aggressive. "Sergeant Miller, isn't it true that you were passed over for promotion 3 times in favor of younger officers, including Officer Conway?" Miller remained composed. "Yes, that's correct." "And might that explain your willingness to make these allegations? Resentment, perhaps?" Miller leaned forward slightly. "Sir, I have 19 commendations and a spotless record. I'm testifying today because 2 days ago I watched these officers arrest a federal judge while calling him racial slurs, then laugh about it afterward. If they'll do that to a judge, what are they doing to ordinary citizens who can't fight back?" Before Whitman could respond, the courtroom doors opened, and a young woman in a business suit hurried to the prosecution table. After a brief whispered exchange with ADA Jackson, the prosecutor addressed the bench. "Your Honor, we'd like to call an additional witness, computer forensic specialist Tamara Wilson from the State Bureau of Investigation." The unexpected witness took the stand and explained her findings with clinical precision. Wilson had discovered evidence that the department's internal complaint database had been systematically altered over the past 3 years. Numerous complaints against specific officers, including Daniels and Conway, had been deleted or modified to appear less serious. "The database maintains a hidden audit log," Wilson explained. "While the complaints themselves were removed, the log shows when and from which computers the deletions occurred." Her testimony implicated not just the 2 officers, but suggested a broader departmental cover-up. As this damning evidence mounted Officer Brett Conway visibly crumbled. His confident demeanor from the previous day had vanished, replaced by nervous glances toward the exit. During a brief recess, he was overheard in a heated exchange with Officer Daniels. "This is on you, Ryan. You always push it too far. That judge thing was your idea." Daniels hissed back, "Shut up. We stick together or we both go down." Upon returning from recess, Conway's attorney requested a brief sidebar. When proceedings resumed, ADA Jackson made an announcement. "Your Honor, Officer Conway has agreed to provide testimony in exchange for consideration in the disciplinary process." Daniels stared at his partner in disbelief as Conway took the stand. Under oath, Conway revealed a disturbing picture of departmental practices. He testified that officers were unofficially encouraged to maintain high arrest numbers in minority neighborhoods to meet monthly quotas. Those with the highest numbers received preferential assignments and overtime opportunities. It was understood that certain types of arrests were more valuable than others, Conway stated, avoiding his former partner's glare. Drug arrests in particular were rewarded, especially in the South Side neighborhoods. Conway's testimony directly implicated Police Chief Roberts in the systematic cover-up of misconduct complaints. According to Conway, Roberts had personally instructed officers on how to manage interactions that might generate complaints, including selective activation of body cams and careful wording in reports. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus maintained his judicial composure despite the personal connection to the unfolding testimony. He ruled on objections with measured fairness, allowed appropriate latitude for both prosecution and defense, and kept the proceedings focused on the pattern of misconduct rather than his own experience. When Calvin Jefferson unexpectedly appeared in the courtroom, Marcus noted his presence without comment. The young man looked exhausted but determined as he conferred briefly with Aisha Martin before approaching the prosecution table. During another recess, Marcus received word that Gerald Conway had attempted to contact several witnesses offering money for them to change their testimony or fail to appear. Court security had detained the retired captain for witness tampering, adding another layer to the already complex case. As the day's proceedings drew to a close, the evidence had painted a picture far more disturbing than individual misconduct by 2 officers. It revealed a systemic problem of racial targeting evidence, manipulation, and institutional protection of abusive practices. Do you believe police departments should have independent oversight to investigate misconduct? Comment number 1. if you think external review boards are essential, or number 2, if you believe police should handle discipline internally. Hit the like button if you're shocked by the corruption revealed in this case, and subscribe to see more stories of justice finally being served. How far do you think this conspiracy goes? Is it just a few bad officers, or does the corruption reach all the way to the top of the department? Let's continue to see how Judge Wright navigates this explosive situation. Sleep eluded Marcus for the 3rd consecutive night. Each time he closed his eyes, the faces of those who had testified paraded through his mind, their stories of humiliation and injustice merging with his own recent experience. He had accepted Judge Thompson's offer of alternative accommodations, now staying in a guest room at her brother's farm 20 miles outside Pinewood. The rural silence, so different from the constant hum of Philadelphia, only amplified his churning thoughts. Shortly after 5 a.m., Marcus gave up on sleep entirely. He sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching dawn gradually illuminate the misty fields. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking: federal judge at center of police controversy was arrest victim. The media had finally connected all the dots, transforming what had begun as a routine misconduct hearing into a national story. Within hours, his phone began ringing incessantly. College classmates, judicial colleagues, reporters, and even his ex-wife called to express concern or seek comments. Marcus declined all interviews, referring inquiries to the court's public information officer. By 7:30, 3 news vans had somehow discovered Thompson's brother's property, forcing Marcus to leave through the back fields to avoid cameras. The atmosphere at the courthouse had transformed as well. The previously manageable demonstrations had swelled to hundreds on both sides. Police supporters waved thin blue line flags and shouted about activist judges, while civil rights demonstrators countered with chants of "No justice, no peace." Security escorted Marcus through a service entrance, but not before he glimpsed a particularly disturbing sign in the crowd: "Right should be wrong 6 feet under." Inside his chambers, Marcus found his daughter Olivia waiting. Her flight from Chicago had landed at dawn, her face tight with worry as she embraced him. "Dad, this is insane. You need to step down from this case right now." Marcus sighed, holding her at arm's length. "Olivia, I can't do that." "Can't or won't?" she challenged. "I'm watching the news, Dad. Death threats, your car vandalized. They're saying some police officers are calling for your badge. This isn't worth your safety." Marcus gestured for her to sit. "Do you remember what Grandma used to say about turning away from injustice?" Olivia's expression softened slightly. "That looking away makes you complicit. But Dad, there are other judges who could handle this case, judges who weren't personally involved." "And that's exactly why I need to see this through," Marcus replied. "Because if I step down after what I experienced, I'm sending a message that the system can be manipulated through intimidation, that an officer can make a case disappear by targeting the judge." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sarah Jenkins entered with an urgent update. "Judge, the police union has organized a larger protest for noon. They're busing in officers from 3 counties, and—" She hesitated. "There's been an ethics complaint filed against you with the Judicial Review Board." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "They're using every available avenue. When is the emergency meeting?" 4 p.m. today, Sarah confirmed. "They're convening by video conference. Judge Thompson will represent you if you're still in session." As Marcus prepared to enter the courtroom, another unexpected development occurred. 4 young officers from the Pinewood Department requested to speak with him privately. Initially cautious, Marcus agreed to meet them in the presence of Judge Thompson as a witness. Officer Rebecca Chen, barely 30, spoke for the group. "Judge Wright, we want you to know that not everyone in the department supports Daniels and Conway. Some of us have been documenting misconduct for months, but we've been afraid to come forward." She handed him a flash drive. "This contains body cam footage that we've saved before it could be accidentally deleted from the system. There are at least 12 incidents showing clear misconduct by the officers you're investigating, plus evidence of higher-ups directing the cover-ups." The young officer's courage moved Marcus deeply. You understand the professional risk you're taking?" Officer James Rodriguez nodded grimly. "We do, but we joined to protect and serve, not to harass and intimidate. What happened to you could have happened to anyone in the black community here. It has happened repeatedly. We can't stand by anymore." As Marcus walked toward the courtroom, he received word that Officer Daniels had been seen approaching Calvin Jefferson in the courthouse parking lot that morning. Security footage showed Daniels appearing to threaten the young man before court personnel intervened. The already complex case continued to expand in troubling directions. The Judicial Review Board meeting loomed over the afternoon proceedings like a thundercloud. Marcus knew his professional reputation was on the line, but found himself thinking of his mother's community in Philadelphia, of Calvin and Aisha, of the young officers risking their careers for what was right. His own judicial career seemed a small price by comparison. When the time came, Marcus took a brief recess to address the review board via video conference from his chambers. The panel of 5 judges, 2 of whom he knew personally, regarded him with expressions ranging from sympathy to stern disapproval. Judge Wright began the senior member, Judge Harold Atkinson. "We're facing an unprecedented situation. Your decision to preside over a case involving officers who arrested you less than 48 hours prior raises serious questions about judicial propriety." Marcus straightened his robes. "With respect, Judge Atkinson, this situation is unprecedented, precisely because officers don't typically arrest federal judges on spurious charges. The unprecedented nature reflects the officer's misconduct, not my response to it." For 20 tense minutes, Marcus defended his decision not to recuse himself, citing relevant precedents and ethical guidelines. He acknowledged the unusual circumstances but maintained that judicial independence would be undermined if officers could manipulate case assignments through targeted harassment. "My duty is to the law and to justice," he concluded. Stepping aside would abdicate that duty and reward the very behavior this hearing seeks to address. The board promised a decision by morning. As Marcus returned to the courtroom, he found an atmosphere of heightened tension. Word had spread about the ethics complaint, creating a sense that the proceedings themselves hung in the balance. Yet something else had shifted as well. The community presence in the gallery had grown, with many wearing expressions of resolute support. Among them, Marcus recognized faces from the evidence video, citizens who had previously been too frightened to come forward officially. That afternoon, as defense attorney Whitman made a last desperate attempt to discredit the mounting evidence, Marcus felt the weight of his dual role as both a symbol of the system's potential for justice and a living example of its failures. During a brief recess, he slipped away to visit the neighborhood where he had grown up in Philadelphia. Though he had physically left it behind decades ago, the lessons learned there had shaped his understanding of justice and injustice. Walking the familiar streets, nodding to residents who saw only a well-dressed black man rather than a federal judge, Marcus reconnected with the perspective that no robe or gavel could ever fully erase. As evening approached and the courtroom finally emptied, a custodian approached Marcus as he gathered his notes. "My son was arrested by those officers last year," the elderly man said quietly. "Planted drugs in his car. He's still serving time." Marcus could offer no comfort beyond a nod of understanding. The system's failures extended far beyond what any single hearing could address. Yet as he left the courthouse under security escort, Marcus caught sight of a small group of young people holding candles in a silent vigil for justice. Among them stood Olivia, her earlier objections apparently reconsidered. The road ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time since the hearing began, Marcus felt the stirring of genuine hope. The third and final day of the hearing dawned with unprecedented security measures in place. Courthouse entrances were restricted with metal detectors and bag searches, creating long lines of spectators and media. State police supplemented local officers, their presence a visible reminder of the case's escalating profile. Inside the courtroom had been rearranged to accommodate additional security personnel. Bulletproof shields, discreetly positioned near the bench, revealed the seriousness of the threats against Marcus. As he donned his robes in chambers, Marcus received the Judicial Review Board's decision. After hours of deliberation, they had voted 3-2 to allow him to continue presiding, citing the extraordinary circumstances and compelling public interest in maintaining judicial independence. Judge Thompson delivered the news personally. "It was close, Marcus. Atkinson and Morris wanted you removed, but the majority recognized the dangerous precedent that would set." Marcus nodded, feeling neither vindication nor relief, only a deepened resolve to ensure the proceedings remained unimpeachable. "Any word on the external threats?" Thompson's expression tightened. "FBI is involved now. They've identified 3 credible threats from white nationalist groups and are monitoring several police forums where officers from other jurisdictions have made concerning statements." The morning session began with testimony from Calvin Jefferson, whose quiet dignity belied his youth. He described a pattern of harassment by officers Daniels and Conway spanning 2 years, including multiple stops without cause, a fabricated drug charge that was later dismissed, and explicit threats to find something that would stick if he filed complaints. "Did you ever report this treatment officially?" ADA Jackson asked. Calvin shook his head. "I tried once. The complaint form disappeared. Then my brother's car got pulled over 3 times in 1 week. I got the message." Under cross-examination, defense attorney Whitman attempted to portray Calvin as an unreliable witness with an axe to grind. "Isn't it true that you have a prior conviction for marijuana possession, Mr. Jefferson?" "Yes, when I was 18, 7 years ago." "And you blame the officers for your legal troubles rather than accepting responsibility for your own actions." Calvin met Whitman's gaze steadily. "My legal troubles 7 years ago were my responsibility. Being pulled over 17 times in 2 years while driving legally is not my responsibility. Being called racial slurs by officers sworn to protect me is not my responsibility. Having evidence planted in my car is not my responsibility." As the morning progressed, Marcus received word that Officer Conway had accepted a plea agreement agreeing to testify about departmental practices in exchange for a lesser disciplinary outcome. His testimony proved even more damning than expected, revealing that the targeting of minority citizens was not merely personal bias, but an unofficial departmental strategy. "We were told to focus on certain neighborhoods and certain types of individuals," Conway testified, avoiding eye contact with his former partner. "The directive was always unofficial, never in writing, but the message was clear. Stats mattered, numbers mattered, and certain arrests counted more than others toward those numbers." "Who gave these directives?" Jackson asked. Conway swallowed visibly. "Chief Roberts primarily, but it came from above him too. The mayor's office wanted crime statistics down, especially before elections. Arrests in certain areas didn't generate public concern, but boosted our numbers." Officer Daniels, now isolated as the remaining respondent, maintained his innocence throughout, blaming Conway for escalating situations and denying any racial motivation in his policing. His testimony grew increasingly defensive as evidence mounted against him. "I was just doing my job according to department training," he insisted repeatedly. The afternoon brought expert testimony on implicit bias in policing and statistical analysis demonstrating the disproportionate targeting of minorities in Pinewood County. Dr. Elaine Chambers, a nationally recognized expert on police practices, presented data showing that black drivers in the county were 6 times more likely to be stopped and searched than white drivers, despite lower rates of contraband being found. Marcus allowed this broader contextual evidence over Whitman's strenuous objections, recognizing that the individual misconduct at issue existed within a larger systemic problem. The most dramatic moment came when Police Chief Roberts was compelled to testify under oath. Initially evasive, his testimony unraveled under Jackson's methodical questioning and the weight of evidence provided by Conway and the young officers. When confronted with email records showing his direct involvement in burying misconduct complaints, Roberts attempted to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights. Chief Roberts, Marcus interjected. "I must remind you that this is an administrative hearing, not a criminal proceeding. While evidence from this hearing may inform potential criminal investigations, your testimony here cannot be directly used against you in a criminal case. You are required to answer the questions posed." Visibly sweating, Roberts eventually admitted to a practice of minimizing or dismissing complaints against certain officers, including Daniels and Conway. More significantly, he implicated State Senator Philip Blackburn in pressuring the department to protect officers who were tough on crime in certain neighborhoods. Senator Blackburn made it clear that officers who kept the arrest numbers up would have protection, Roberts testified reluctantly. He has family connections in the county prosecutor's office and the Judicial Appointment Committee. He could make problems go away. As this testimony unfolded, Gerald Conway attempted to force his way into the courtroom, creating a disturbance that required his removal and arrest for contempt of court. The incident only underscored the tension permeating the proceedings. In a last desperate maneuver, Whitman attempted to discredit Marcus, directly introducing affidavits from officers, claiming they had overheard the judge making biased statements about the case. Marcus allowed the evidence to be presented, then systematically dismantled its credibility by pointing out that the alleged statements occurred at times when court records and security footage showed him to be elsewhere. As the evidentiary phase concluded, Marcus addressed the courtroom with measured authority. This hearing began as an examination of specific allegations against two officers. It has revealed issues that extend far beyond individual misconduct to suggest systemic problems requiring comprehensive reform. While this court's jurisdiction is limited to the specific complaints before it, the evidence presented demands broader attention from appropriate authorities. He looked directly at the gallery where representatives from the Department of Justice had been observing the proceedings. No system of justice can function when those sworn to uphold the law become its most flagrant violators. Nor can any community thrive when portions of its population live in justified fear of those meant to protect them. Judge Thompson joined Marcus on the bench for the closing statements, a procedural move that reinforced the institutional weight of the proceedings while providing a second judicial perspective on the evidence. As deliberations began on the officer's fate, word arrived that the Department of Justice had announced a pattern or practice investigation into the Pinewood County Sheriff's Department, citing evidence revealed during the hearing. For Marcus, the moment represented both a professional crossroads and a personal reckoning. The system that had failed him and countless others now faced its own judgment. The question remaining was whether that judgment would lead to meaningful change or merely symbolic gestures. The courtroom fell into profound silence as Judge Marcus Wright prepared to deliver his ruling. 3 days of explosive testimony had transformed what began as a routine misconduct hearing into a watershed moment for Pinewood County. Every seat in the gallery was filled with spectators lining the walls and media representatives poised to transmit his words across the nation. Marcus had spent the previous night crafting his decision with meticulous care, weighing both the specific evidence against the officers and the broader implications for justice in the community. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the quiet authority that had defined his tenure on the bench. This court has considered the testimony of 27 witnesses, reviewed over 40 hours of video evidence, and examined nearly 300 pages of documentation regarding the conduct of officers Ryan Daniels and Brett Conway. The evidence presents a disturbing pattern of misconduct that cannot be dismissed as isolated incidents or good faith errors in judgment. He paused briefly, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom before continuing. Officer Conway has acknowledged his misconduct and cooperated with this investigation. While this cooperation does not excuse his actions, it demonstrates a recognition of wrongdoing that this court acknowledges. Officer Daniels has maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, showing no remorse or recognition of the harm his actions have caused. Marcus detailed the specific violations committed by each officer, methodically connecting each finding to the evidence presented. For Conway, the ruling included suspension, without pay for 6 months mandatory retraining and 5 years of enhanced supervision with quarterly review. For Daniels, the consequences were more severe. Termination of employment, permanent revocation of his law enforcement certification in the state, and referral to the district attorney for potential criminal charges related to evidence tampering and perjury. Beyond the individual officers, Marcus expanded the scope of his ruling to address the departmental culture that had enabled their behavior. This court cannot ignore evidence of systemic issues within the Pinewood County Sheriff's Department. Therefore, I am ordering immediate implementation of the following reforms: mandatory body cameras for all officers with penalties for deactivation, an independent civilian review board with investigative powers, comprehensive bias training for all department personnel, and a complete audit of all arrest and search patterns over the past 5 years to identify and address racial disparities. As murmurs spread through the courtroom, Marcus continued with the most unexpected portion of his ruling. Having rendered these judgments, I must now address a matter of judicial ethics. While this court has maintained impartiality throughout these proceedings, the appearance of impartiality is equally important to public confidence in our justice system. Therefore, I am recusing myself from the sentencing phase of these proceedings. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. My recusal at this stage is not an acknowledgment of bias, but rather a recognition that justice must not only be done, but be seen to be done. Judge Beverly Thompson will oversee the implementation of the disciplinary measures and reforms outlined in this ruling. This decision, entirely voluntary and unexpected, demonstrated a commitment to ethical principles that transcended personal vindication. It was Marcus's final answer to those who had questioned his impartiality, a powerful statement that principles of justice mattered more than personal satisfaction. In the days that followed, the repercussions of the hearing extended far beyond the courthouse. City officials announced comprehensive reforms to police hiring, training, and accountability measures. Chief Roberts resigned, facing potential criminal charges for his role in covering up misconduct. Senator Blackburn issued a carefully worded statement distancing himself from the department while facing increased scrutiny from ethics investigators. For Calvin Jefferson, justice arrived in an unexpected form. The district attorney's office, under new leadership following Hamilton's resignation, reviewed his case and dozens of others involving the discredited officers. His record was expunged and a path cleared for compensation for his wrongful arrests. Media coverage depicted Marcus as a symbol of judicial integrity, with editorials across the political spectrum acknowledging the careful balance he had maintained between addressing injustice and preserving proper judicial conduct. Perhaps most significantly, Marcus established the Right Justice Initiative, a foundation dedicated to providing legal representation to victims of police misconduct and advocating for systemic reforms. Funded initially from his own savings and quickly supported by donations from across the country, the initiative promised to extend the impact of the Pinewood case far beyond its immediate jurisdiction. Officer Conway, following his suspension, began cooperating extensively with federal investigators, providing evidence that would eventually lead to charges against several department officials and political figures who had enabled the corrupt system. Daniels, facing the destruction of his career and potential criminal charges, requested a meeting with Marcus before his judicial assignment in Pinewood concluded. In the privacy of his chambers with security present but unobtrusive, Marcus granted the request. "Why did you do it?" Daniels asked, the bravado of the courtroom entirely absent. "You could have recused yourself from the beginning. You could have filed a separate complaint. Why put yourself through this?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Because this was never about me, Officer Daniels. It was about Calvin Jefferson, about Aisha Martin's brother, about every person who experienced what I experienced but lacked the position to demand accountability." He leaned forward slightly. "And it was about you, too, about what happens to good people in a broken system that rewards the wrong behaviors and punishes the right ones." Daniels looked away. "I didn't start out wanting to be this kind of cop." "Few do," Marcus replied. But systems shape people as surely as people shape systems. The question now is whether you'll use this experience to become part of the solution. As Marcus finally prepared to return to Philadelphia, having postponed his mother's funeral to complete the hearing, he visited the police academy where a new training program was being implemented. The cadets, a notably diverse group, listened attentively as he shared perspectives on justice that few judges ever have the opportunity or cause to develop. The badge and the gavel serve the same ideal, he told them, not power over others, but service to all. Several weeks later, Marcus received a letter from a young black law student who had been inspired by the case to pursue a judicial career. "You showed me that the system can work when good people refuse to look away from injustice." The student wrote, "I want to be part of making that happen more often." Marcus returned to his regular docket in Philadelphia with a deepened understanding of both the power and limitations of his position. Cases involving police conduct now carried personal resonance, but also a more nuanced appreciation for the complexities faced by officers who served with integrity. In his final act before leaving Pinewood, Marcus fulfilled his original purpose for visiting, holding a proper memorial service for his mother. As he spoke of her lifetime commitment to justice and dignity, he recognized how profoundly her example had guided him through the most challenging case of his career. The true measure of the Pinewood case's impact became visible months later when Marcus visited the county on judicial business and observed a traffic stop from his car. The young officer, one of those who had come forward during the hearing, treated the minority driver with conspicuous respect, explaining the reason for the stop clearly and checking identification efficiently without unwarranted suspicion. As Marcus drove past, the officer glanced up, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. The subtle nod they exchanged acknowledged a shared understanding that justice, while imperfect and ongoing, was possible when enough people committed themselves to its pursuit. What would you do if you were in Judge Wright's position? Would you have recused yourself or stayed on the case to ensure justice was served? Comment below with your thoughts. If you believe our justice system needs more judges with this kind of integrity and courage, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about standing up against injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one person can make a difference in fighting systemic racism. Thank you for watching this journey of justice, dignity, and the power of quiet strength. May we all find the courage to stand firm when facing injustice in our own lives. The story of Judge Marcus Wright teaches us that true justice requires courage, integrity, and the willingness to stand firm when facing systemic racism. It reminds us that positions of power come with responsibility not just to ourselves, but to everyone who lacks the protection such positions provide. Wright could have recused himself for personal safety and professional comfort, but he recognized that his unique position allowed him to address injustices that countless others had suffered without recourse. His experience demonstrates that one person of principle can challenge corrupt systems when they refuse to look away from uncomfortable truths. The case illustrates how racism in law enforcement isn't just about individual bias, but about institutional practices that enable and protect discriminatory behavior. Perhaps most importantly, Wright's decision to recuse himself from the sentencing phase shows that true justice isn't about personal vindication, but about restoring fairness and dignity to a broken system. His legacy reminds us that meaningful change requires both holding individuals accountable and addressing the broader systems that shape their behavior. Have you ever witnessed injustice and wished you had the power to make things right? What would you have done in Judge Wright's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of standing against racist practices inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of justice and resilience. Don't forget to share with someone who needs a reminder that one person can make a difference when they stand on principle. Thank you for joining us on this journey through a powerful story of dignity and quiet strength in the face of discrimination. May we all find the courage to fight for justice in our own communities.